Hello everyone, my name is Laura Van Daken with Visible's marketing team, and I will be your meeting host. I'd like to welcome you to today's webcast on social media and the true power of employee advocacy. Before we get started, let me cover a few housekeeping details, and then I will introduce our guest speaker. Your phone lines will be muted during the presentation, so please use the chat function in the WebEx control panel to communicate with me throughout the presentation. At the end of the presentation, we'll take as many questions as time allows. You may submit your questions using the Q&A tab in the WebEx control panel. It is my pleasure today to welcome our presenter, Brian Solis. Brian is a principal at the Altimeter Group, a research firm focused on disruptive technology. A digital analyst, sociologist, and futurist, Solis has studied and influenced the effects of emerging technology on business, marketing, and culture. Brian is also globally recognized as one of the most prominent thought leaders and published authors in new media, with very well-known books such as What's the Future of Business, Engage, and The End of Business as Usual. Today, Brian will share his perspective on best practices to scale social media efforts and empower employees to be brand advocates. I will also be sharing some case studies at the end, illustrating how some leading companies are putting these concepts into action. So with that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Brian.
Fantastic, and hopefully you can hear me okay. And Laura, can you hear me okay?
Oh, yep, we can hear you.
Okay. And now I'm going to share my desktop. And Laura, is that showing up there for you?
Yep.
Oh, I love it when technology works. All right, well, thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We're going to talk about employee advocacy and how social media really either helps you become stronger or it could help sort of expose weaknesses that you need to address. And part of this has to do with just sort of the newness and the splendor and the wonder that is social media. I mean, it's so fantastic. It is so personal. It represents the things basically of who we are, what we do, what we share in our personal lives. And it's a technology that hasn't necessarily been rolled out at the enterprise level from the IT department. It's something that you and I brought into the organization over the years because it just became such a powerful form of communication and stronger connections and more expansive relationships across the web. And so as a result, businesses sort of had to react to the influx of social media, from establishing processes and governance to strategy. It's just sort of reacting. And I think the first bits of movement in social inside the organization started around 2005. And here we are in 2013, and we're still trying to figure it out. And I'd like to propose that you and I together today kind of look at what the real opportunities are, where we're trying to go, and what it's going to take to get there. You know, after researching this for so many years, and then also doing what I could to sort of share where we need to be going over time, one thing that became clear, and is still clear, is that we look at social media as a medium, as a series of media. And what we need to do is look at them as channels to sort of communicate in ways that make us more human is probably a way to say it. But I refer to the phenomenon that's taking place these days as mediumalism. It's where we place greater emphasis on the technology or the medium than we do at sort of looking at the opportunity to use it to communicate value, deliver value, to learn, et cetera, outcomes versus, tools. Because the reality is that we are in social by default trying to communicate with an audience that has an audience of its own. And so if we're not part of the society, if we're not actually part of the community, much in the same way that you use it as an individual, we by default sort of become antisocial. Our job here is to be part of the community when we talk, when we engage, that it sort of creates a reverberation that's positive, so that when we say things like viral videos or things that are going to go viral or word of mouth, that we always have something positive associated with it. My colleague Jeremiah Awyang runs an ongoing survey of which we just sort of updated in the last quarter of 2012. But you could see that the likelihood for employee-related incidents in social media is pretty high, that there's going to be anywhere between 1 and 5 incidents. At least half of the businesses are going to experience that. And there's a reason for that, right? Because even though we have policies, even though we have playbooks, there is no cure for uncommon sense, which is actually a little bit more common than I think we want to give it credit for. It never ceases to amaze me that when we see examples of brands that get it wrong in social media, that spark a lot of negative conversations based on one, say, thoughtless tweet or update or the deleted comments of the community, I think those social media experts will say, wow, really? This is still going on? I know that I still have that reaction. When you look at how businesses react, it's one thing. Sure, they try to do right. They apologize, and sometimes maybe the employee is reprimanded or worse, fired. But if you look at the governances that are in place within the organization today, the policies, the playbooks, the training, it might actually have to do with all of those things, even though they're designed to prevent these things, than it does to, say, solve the problem. So let me give you an example. If I tell you in a playbook to use common sense, it's pretty clear that I'm already setting up for failure. To use common sense doesn't specifically say, hey, by the way, don't be logged into your personal account and your brand account on the same app, because at some point you're going to make a mistake. That needs to be explicitly called out. There also needs to be repercussions that employees understand, that if they're allowed to represent the brand, that if certain things happen, that there are certain ramifications that will happen as a result. But at the same time, it's not just about how your employees engage, it's also about how you manage communities, right? Because empowering your employees to unlock employee advocacy has to start with what advocacy stands for, what it's all about, what you're trying to accomplish. And when you say something, let's just say, not cool or thoughtless, or when you start to delete comments or mismanage a community, you reap the repercussions that you deserve. And this is why I believe we need to take a step back. In order to unlock employee advocacy, we have to first define what it is that we're trying to accomplish within social media, because just simply putting people on social networks, training them based on the playbooks and governances and policies that are in place today, it's just not good enough. In a study that Altimeter Group did in the last quarter of 2012, we learned that a substantial amount of businesses say that their employees' knowledge of, say, policies related to social media was poor or very poor. So even though you're working on developing these standards or these policies or these playbooks, your employees don't know what it means. They don't know how to use it. They don't know how to apply it. And that is, well, due to a variety of reasons. And just look at this, 27% of employees who are aware and trained on their company's social media usage policies. So even though the company has policies in place, employees aren't aware of them. So to unlock employee advocacy, well, we got to start from the beginning, because even though companies have a policy, only half have a consumer-facing community policy. So as you saw in the chapstick example, there's just much more to this than the dynamics of engagement. There's much more to this than just letting people get on the front lines of social media for you. I mean, this is a powerful series of media. This is an opportunity for you to connect with human beings who are connected or even more connected than you and me. that are more connected than the brand, that have greater influence than the brand. And we really have to think about how do we make our employees and our brand more influential overall. And that starts not just with processes and playbooks, but also a strategy, a vision, purpose, because businesses are only going to increase spending in social media, and as a result, they have to increase spending in training and education. But I want to introduce a curveball to you. One of the things that we found in our research was that companies weren't necessarily bringing to the table a holistic approach to social media. This is sort of a problem when you're looking at employee advocacy, right? Because employee advocacy could be anything from sales to customer service to marketing to expert engagement to establishing themselves as authorities, give direction or solve problems or answer questions. The problem is that the majority of social media today is run from the marketing department or from corporate communications, and as such, it is only limited in its view. A customer, for example, doesn't see one sliver of a brand in social media. They see the brand, and they expect to be able to engage the brand in whatever element or whatever moment or whatever position they are in the customer life cycle. So that means in order to unlock employee advocacy, you need to align employees around the needs and expectations of customers within social networks. So the fact that only 26% are operating holistically around social media just shows you how nascent everything really is. You know, I was following my Twitter stream recently, and I saw this tweet that had stemmed from the Get Satisfaction conference last week, and it talked about this need to jump into social media and to build a community and to accumulate likes and amass fans and followers. And the last screen there says, you know, so that we could spam the heck out of them. And when you look at how social media is aligned today around marketing and corporate communications, I mean, this cartoon does have some merit to it. And I'd like for you to think about, as you are developing your employee advocacy programs and your strategies for this year and next year, you know, I think we have to just sort of rethink what social means at all. You know, I think that a lot of this has to do with us really getting caught up in Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and Foursquare and Pinterest because they were hot and they were trendy and that's where people were, but without necessarily thinking about the greater impact of how it's going to help our business, how it's going to improve relationships, and overall where we're trying to go with this. Because as you can see here in a report that Charlene Lee and I released in March called The 6 Stages of Social Business Evolution, only a third of businesses agreed that their organizations use clear metrics in social media to align those to business outcomes. And when that few organizations or that few of organizations have metrics that align social media to business goals, you can see that a majority of businesses are just sort of using social for the sake of using social. Sort of gives credence to that cartoon. So you can't even think about unlocking your employees as advocates until you have a business strategy that's going to design around real business outcomes, right? Otherwise, you see all of those examples at the beginning of the deck. They're just going to continue to happen because they can. So what you can't necessarily see here is the full word for some reason. Beware the COE pitfall. This is what we call the center of excellence. A lot of businesses, as they start to mature in social media, whether it's employee engagement, whether it's customer engagement, they build a center of excellence so that they can develop policies, so they can develop the playbooks, so that they can develop the education and training necessary. But what ends up happening, though, is that these COEs are being developed without that greater business mission or purpose, or how to align social media strategies with business objectives. So what ends up happening is that we found is that in a majority of businesses, this center of excellence is created to essentially perpetuate the problem. What you saw with Kenneth Cole, what you saw with Chapstick, what you saw with KitchenAid, that's all designed to happen because the infrastructure itself isn't designed to prevent it. It's sort of designed to haphazardly prevent it. I do believe that the future of engagement and also employee advocacy means that we sort of need to start again. What we're learning is that right now businesses are realizing that they might have built their house of cards on a weak foundation, so they had to just knock everything down and try again. So let me get specific. When you are looking to empower your employees in terms of advocacy, you have to start by asking some real basic questions. What's the voice of our brand? What are we trying to do within social networks? When our representatives are in social networks on our behalf, what is it that we want them to do? How is it that we want them to act? How is it that we want them to sound? What does the outcomes of each engagement look like? So if you, as a representative, talk to me as a customer, what's the outcome? What do you want to have happen after you and I stop talking? What ends up happening is that businesses that don't answer these questions end up perpetuating the problem further. I call it multiple personality disorder in social media because essentially there's the voice of a company, there's the voice of all of your individual representatives, and essentially when you look at everything holistically, as a customer would, you start to see this chaos or this anarchy. There's just no central voice. And you look at how advertising and marketing over the decades sort of prevented this problem from happening, at least in traditional media, is they would write or create style guides or brand usage guidelines. You know, this font, this Pantone color, this imagery is very, very command and control sort of style around how the brand could be used and presented because it's valuable that way, right? If it's going to be presented as such, if you've designed it to be perceived as such, therefore everything you do has to strengthen it. If not, you are by default weakening it. And the same is true for social media. Empowering your employees starts with defining who your brand is, what the voice is, the persona is, and then bringing what I call multiple personality in order so that your representatives still can have their voice, but as the voice aligns with the voice of the brand, the purpose of the brand, the personality of the brand. And this becomes critical because otherwise there is what your brand represents and then this great divide for what your brand looks and sounds and acts like. And I've done a lot of these audits over the years, and it's incredible to me just how big this divide is. And over time, you don't just perpetuate the problem, you really start to redefine your brand within social media, unintentionally, by the way, and that's a big problem. I did a survey of some of the top luxury brands where I looked at how they were talking, the content that they were creating, what it is that they were presenting in social. And a lot of this, mind you, was representative engagement. So while these representatives were empowered to act as advocates, for example, what they were doing by default was just sort of, I don't know, homogenizing the luxury space because they all sounded the same, they all acted the same, they all talked the same. And it was clear that there wasn't a voice or a persona at the time when I did this research. And as a result, you know, engagement is low across the board. You think about the mystique of some of these brands, you think of sort of how they're elite in their markets. Therefore, there needs to be some sort of profile, some sort of style guide around that so that your employees are not just advocating, they're sort of bringing to life the brand in a way that's desirable. And so I ask you this, you know, to think beyond content calendars, to think beyond using social media as a way to entertain or as a way to inform or as a way to just try to boost engagement numbers. Your employees need to not only be trained but also guided in a way that's going to help their engagement drive business outcomes and then also meet or exceed customer expectations within social media. So coming back to that idea of mediumalism, it's not about the tools, right? It's about the strategy. And employees who are going to represent the business are going to need to better understand that strategy. They're going to need to be trained against that strategy and the role that they represent within the customer lifecycle. And more importantly, how it is that they are going to deliver the results you need to demonstrate success. Because if you can't demonstrate success, you're going to forever bash your head against the wall trying to get greater resources and greater budget for social media. And this is why the ROI question comes up a lot. I mean, at the end of the day, you are the very people you're trying to reach. You are customers of other brands. You are users of social networks. You know how you want to be engaged. And so it's your role, it's my role to help make sure that within the organization we're empowering people the right way. It's not just about putting evangelists in place. This has to be a contribution to a greater journey that we bring customers along. So it's marketing, it's service, it's sales. All of these things have to work in unison, and in order to work in unison, there has to be a hub that is defining why we're doing this, why it's important, how to demonstrate success, and more importantly, how do we look and act like we're operating from the same company. And overall, you know, if you had to say what's the voice of our company and who would it be and who would it sound like if it was a person, everybody's got to be in agreement on that. And I can tell you this, that when Charlene and I did our research here in terms of social business evolution, we had found that a lot of social media strategies, the majority of social media strategies out there, were not driven by a vision or a mission or a purpose. And it kind of starts there. Having an understanding of what you're trying to do, what the value is, and why anybody's going to care, and why your employees could benefit from engaging, and why your brand could benefit from your employees engaging. These are things that just need answers, that need definitions. Because, look, the whole point of social media is that it's social. People are going to talk. People are going to talk with or without you. And the role of your employees in an advocacy program is to sort of perpetuate the shared experiences you want people to have and the experiences you want people to share. And that's the importance of engagement. So earlier when I asked, what do you want to have happen when you engage with me? That has to be defined in a variety of scenarios. It can't just be enough that there was engagement. There has to be desired outcomes. That is the future of social media. It's experiential. And so our jobs here are to build bridges, are to engage, and to generate the types of experiences and outcomes that we believe are going to be beneficial to not just us, but the people that we're engaging with. And in order to get there, well, sometimes you just need to think more about how we're going to build a stronger infrastructure, a more strategic infrastructure, before we look at running around outside. I have worked with companies, I know this is going to sound crazy, but I have worked with companies that have realized that everybody who had been trained in social media, everybody that was currently engaging and representing the brand in social media was operating from the wrong premise. And they had to stop and get everything redone, from the vision to the purpose to the objectives and how they aligned both in social media and with the business, an evaluation of the overall customer journey, how people are using social media from a service, sales, discovery standpoint. Everything had to be redone so it could be integrated. And then once those strategies were developed, the work of defining the voice and the persona had to be defined, and then people had to be trained against everything so that they were essentially operating as one and delivering a consistent experience as one and driving the types of outcomes that were going to have business impact. So, for example, when we see companies looking at enterprise social networks, a lot of it is just this idea that we're bringing Facebook behind the firewall, when in fact what we're really trying to do is increase understanding, awareness, knowledge sharing, best practices, and to bring people together who didn't necessarily work together. Your employees, I guess to say another way, are your influencers, and their effectiveness is going to be dependent on how well you arm them with not just how to use these tools, but how doing so, how engaging with people is going to contribute to the bottom line. This is something that I'd like to share with you, these 4 elements that is from one of the smarter businesses that I had a chance to work with, is that your employees, in order to be successful out there, they need to have business acumen. They need to understand not just how Twitter and Facebook and Pinterest work, how your business benefits from being involved there. They need to be able to make those connections. They need to better understand the value proposition of your company so that when they're in there, when they're in these networks, that they're not just engaging to have conversations, because anybody can do that. They're engaging to do something that's more meaningful and significant. They have to have channel expertise, of course, but they also have this engagement mentality that's empowered with confidence and also the support of the organization, because that's why they're there in the first place. And they also have to have the ability to be a storyteller, because just having conversations, again, is table stakes. But being able to put people on a journey and make them feel part of an experience is, well, that's a bigger deal. And a lot of this comes down to defining really what your brand is and how it matters in a much more human and social environment. So I'm not saying that you need to redo your branding. I'm just saying adapt it to a different ecosystem, right? Because how we used to promote the brand and how we would reinforce the brand before, well, that's one thing. But in a social ecosystem where it's incredibly democratized, where people are at the center of their own ecosystems, as I refer to it, they need something more tangible, something more not just experiential, but visceral, something that, I guess the right word for it would be empathetic. So you need to add new pillars to your branding that humanize it. So the beliefs, the story, the promise. You need to look at not just bureaucracy of the organization, but what John Husband refers to as this hierarchy. Empowering your employees takes more than giving them access to these tools. They need the confidence to use these tools in a way that's going to let them do their jobs more effectively and better, actually, while we're at it. Why? Because we're not the only ones trying to be human. We're not the only brands that are trying to humanize our story. We're not just trying to become more authentic or more transparent. And people are also becoming brands here. And as a result, it sort of creates this equilibrium where mutual value and exchange become important. And so I want to introduce you to something that I had been experimenting with since, my goodness, going back to the days of Engage. It was this idea of a brand reflection cycle where you go through this exercise as a team, not just marketing and not just a social media team, but as a team of stakeholders of every step, from every step of the customer journey, to come up with what the online identity persona is. And there are several elements to this that I'll run through, but I believe that we're going to be sharing this deck so that I'll kind of run through it quickly. But you have to look at the core values of the brand and translate that to social media. Document the brand pillars. Articulate the promise. What is it that the brand is hoping to become in social media? What's the role you want to play? What are the characteristics that you want to communicate in how you act and how you talk and the things that you share? What are the opportunities that you want to seize today and over time? What is the culture of your social ecosystem? Every social network has its own culture and subculture within it. What's the culture that you want to convey? If you had to, say, look at the culture of Zappos or the culture of Red Bull or the culture of EMC, you could pretty much fill in this as a representative of what is, and there's also what could be. But the point is that they're going to be different. And just the process of going through this helps you identify what the personality is going to be. And that's going to inform sort of your strategy, your playbooks, your training, how you measure success. All of these things are going to help you. But more importantly, just going through this exercise is going to help you create alignment within the organization. This, to me, is one of the most, I guess, promising opportunities for you, enriching opportunities. And by the way, the thing that's going to help you create a much more effective employee advocacy program and probably overall a more effective social media strategy. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here because we are running out of time, but I will ask you to do this. Google Brand Stokes, 9 criteria for brand essence. This, to me, is one of the most interesting frameworks that I believe can help you define what it is your brand is in social networks. It allows you to really define a strategy about how you want to be perceived, what that experience is going to look like. I believe that Bram Stokes' 9 elements are not only valuable, but they're just by the nature of going through them. And also the last slide, that last exercise, you by default become much more human. You understand how to make that voice matter, how to make that voice sort of strengthen the brand overall, because you're introducing new elements that just didn't have to exist before. And to me, going through this allows you to do what I believe is going to be the most important part of this webinar. And that is, once you have this brand promise sort of articulated, and once you've been able to understand the core values of the organization, once you define that brand persona, the characteristics, and the voice, then you can inform the people who are going to be on the front lines for your brand how to align their voice, how to align their words, how to align their mannerisms, how they talk, how they act, in a way that aligns with the business. So let me put it to you this way. I'm not saying that we want to silence the voice of who your representatives are as individuals, but look at Disney. Those characters who come out at Disneyland, for example, to the kids that they're engaging with, that is Snow White. That is Mickey Mouse. And, of course, when, say, Snow White needs to take a smoke break, she's going to sneak out through a hidden passageway, and the children are never going to see that. She goes back to being who she is in the real world. Maybe it's Martha. But when she comes back out there, she is a representative of Disney, and she is Snow White. And that was defined for her. That's defined as a character in the Disney ecosystem, as a character that brings out the types of experiences that were defined. And that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about modernizing your style guide in a way that empowers your employees to be not just effective, but influential and inspiring and engaging and empathetic representatives of your brand within a very human series of networks that, by the way, aren't going to go away. They're only going to continue to perpetuate. And it's not just the voice of your brand. It's considering the voice of your customer by understanding the journey that they take, understanding what it is that they're looking for, the questions that they ask, the answers that they're looking for, because just engaging with them, just having social presences, just giving employees access to social networks to talk to people, that is social media 101. If you want to have a competitive advantage, then what we're talking about today in terms of the voice of your brand and the voice of your customer, well, that's going to change everything, because you're now the producers and architects of experiences and engagement. You guide the customer journey. To empower your employees means that they have to have a mission, and that mission needs to be defined, and that mission needs a foundation so that they understand the boundaries of what success looks like and what failure looks like. These things need to be defined. Anything less is for everyone else. And that is, by the way, what all research and data shows, is that everyone else is on par for complacency. When in fact what we're talking about is doing something far more meaningful, far more productive, far more significant, and more importantly, far more able to deliver against business outcomes that by default will allow you to demonstrate ROI. And once you start doing that, the world is yours. You want more budget, you want more resources, you're able to show how all of this engagement is having a positive impact on your business. There you go. So I'm going to leave you with just a few tips here, and then I'm going to turn it over to the Visible team to share some of the experiences that they've had. So with these 3 slides, think about the first part, which is define your vision and mission. What are you setting out to accomplish? Because if you can answer that question, you can then understand how to empower your employees. But more importantly, what's the value for your customers? And what's the value if you ask people to engage from the side of your business? There has to be mutual value. Articulate the experience you want people to have and share. Find your voice. Get some manners. And by manners, I mean define the characteristics the roles and responsibilities, the engagement scenarios. These are all things that have to be defined and trained against before you can even really expect to use social media. I'm surprised we got as far as we did before really having to think back about how to create alignment between social media and business objectives and the overall brand and its role in all of this. And then make sure that you balance that brand voice with the individual personality, because that is, by default, where things start to unravel. We've seen it time and time again. Assign roles and responsibilities, prepare them through these various engagement scenarios that match the customer life cycle, the customer journey. Train accordingly, and once you do that, then you have the foundation to scale. So it's a lot to throw at you in a half an hour. We'll make the deck available. There's more to this that we could provide to you in terms of links and resources, but this was meant to get you thinking about how you can raise the bar and introduce a competitive advantage while improving the experiences and the engagement and the relationships that your employees have with one another and the relationships and experiences that they have with customers. And largely, the customers are going to share those experiences, so doing this right helps you get to where you need to be. So with that, thank you so much for your time. I'm going to turn it back over to Visible, and I think to do that, I've got to do a couple things.
Okay, well, thanks, Brian. Now that Brian introduced some of the concepts about employee advocacy, I wanted to share some case studies to show you how some companies are putting these ideas into practice. So the first one that I'll talk about is Microsoft, and the Microsoft IT professional community team has been a client of Visible since 2009. And Visible Intelligence was initially used to identify the top IT pro communities where key topics are being discussed related to Microsoft products and IT issues. And VI was also used to identify the top influencers in those communities. It's now being used to engage with IT professionals directly, mostly on blogs and forums, to help with any issues or questions that individuals in the community may have. And Microsoft has received some very positive feedback from within the IT pro community about the breadth and the quality of their participation and responsiveness, which is great. And their success in social engagement across their brands is due to some key factors that I wanted to share with you. So first and foremost, they established an engagement strategy, as Brian mentioned. That is really important to upfront decide what the goals are for each brand. Who are they trying to reach? What are they trying to achieve? What are the key communication points? They also have an ongoing education program for all members on the community's team. And this isn't just a one-time and then you're off on your own. It's an ongoing program where examples are shared, do's and don'ts, and the premise really is that don't rush, think things through. And Tony Mann, who runs the engagement team, said you can have 1,000 great interactions, but potentially, one negative engagement is what people may remember. So you really need to be careful. It's worth taking the time. Don't just get that tweet ready and then hit send, but think it through. He also said the smallest details matter, and they do, because that's a record that stays out there for everyone to see. They also determined the rules of engagement that are shared with everyone. It's an internal guide about how, when, why to engage, and it also includes the tone and brand guidelines to use for each product, and that, again, is something that Brian talked about during his presentation. They also have a defined review process. So what that means is that they have a clear process and procedures, so there's no guesswork about what to do, and each post is reviewed before it goes out. And finally, something that I thought was really interesting is that they have cross-group meetings across teams and brands where they sit down, talk about the objectives moving forward as things change. And it's also a great opportunity for them to share learnings across teams and across brands so that everyone is aligned, which I think is another great practice. The next one that I'll talk about is a mobile device manufacturer, and this is an example of how to do a global rollout. So last year, this device manufacturer was looking to start their social media listening program, and they have a large global presence, so they were really looking for a centralized platform for monitoring and responding to customer issues. This was something that was very important to them. They selected Visible Intelligence, and they rolled out their social media monitoring initiative in the U.S. And after listening for a while, and getting the gist for the conversations that were happening around their brand, their products, and the industry, they decided to launch a customer care Twitter handle, and then they began assigning and tracking responses and reporting progress on that. And what this did was it helped the individual in charge of this effort to create a global strategy of how to expand their social media efforts beyond the U.S. And also expand their customer engagement. And so this individual was able to put together a business case. They also generated best practices given the volumes that they saw on Twitter and the types of issues and questions that came up. And after doing this and tracking the metrics, they saw a real impact on customer perception of the brand image due to these efforts. So that essentially helped them set the platform for that global expansion. And they are now in the process of expanding their social monitoring and engagement program to other countries in multiple languages. And each rollout involves training and sharing best practices with the team that's going to engage. And then they also have meetings where representatives from each engagement team in different countries discusses what's working, what isn't working, and some changes they're thinking about making. So with that, hopefully that was helpful and got the wheels turning for you about some things that you could try at your company. And I wanted to turn it over now for Q&A. And actually have our first question. So Brian, question for you. How is this done in the pharma medical device industry? Due to regulatory considerations, we limit the number of employees who can speak on our behalf, and every comment and tweet has to be approved. So would you say that there's different rules that apply to the pharma or medical device industry?
Any regulated industry has to definitely play by different rules. I have worked with several pharma companies over the last several years, and I can tell you this, is that legal is there to protect everybody, and the fact that you're able to at least engage shows that you're probably ahead of most of your competitors. I can tell you this, though, that once you respond, you by default sort of become an extension of what that brand is, or what the drug is, or what the device represents. And so not only do you have to have legal approval for what is in that tweet, for example, you should also have brand approval as to how that response is formulated, because that response is going to contribute to the perception of the brand, whether you know it or not, or whether you like it or not. So I do think that in some regulated scenarios, I have seen businesses look at the variety of engagement scenarios, or like you said with Microsoft, the rules of engagement, define those scenarios, define likely responses that have legal pre-approval, but use that as an exercise to demonstrate or articulate what that voice what the persona, what the reputation of that brand is going to be, so that as legal considering the response, that is already factored into it.
Okay, great. Another question, Brian. How important is it to have social media buy-in from the CEO of a company?
Oh man, when we ran that report that we published in March, we had found that an overwhelming majority of businesses didn't have executive support, and a lot of that, there's so many different reasons why. I can tell you that one of the most common is simply because executives or CEOs don't necessarily understand the real value of social media, mostly because they don't use it, mostly because their kids use it, and to them it's not a strategic business communication tool. Email to them is a business communication tool. I mean, these are also the same people who didn't necessarily believe that the World Wide Web was going to be what it is today. But you have to remember, though, that these individuals may or may not even read their own emails. They have people that do that for them. They live in a world of spreadsheets. They live in a world of PowerPoints. They talk to shareholders and stakeholders. So a lot of this comes down to us. Are we going to be able to communicate the value of social media to CEOs in order to get their support and their buy-in? And the best advice I can give you on that front is really to stop talking about social media. Stop talking about Twitter, stop talking about Facebook, and start talking about customer lifecycle and customer engagement and customer value, lifetime value. The language that they speak is related to terms that exist today. And our job, or at least those who seem to find more success than others, are going to be rooted in the ability to sort of take what it is they know is possible, the trends that they see that are occurring, and communicate that to CEOs, whereas social media just become the mechanisms and the channels and the platforms to bring out the types of objectives and outcomes that you want to have at a business level. I'll give you a quote from a CEO that I work with. Global business-to-business company said, the more you come into my office and ask for resources and support and budget for social media, the more you're going to fail. But when you come into my office and you talk about business priorities and you talk about customer experiences and expectations, and we look at how all of these things are going to be able to help us achieve goals, then you have my attention and then you have my support. It's just a simple shift in perspective and language where the tools become enablers. And his last words were, social media must be an enabler of something more.
Okay, one other question, Brian. What do you think is the best way to empower employees to become brand advocates? Not necessarily employees that manage the brand's social accounts, but just individual employees. Brian, were you able to hear that question?
Oh my goodness, I was talking on mute. The question, I have the question for you first, Laura, was, are you reading that question as how do we empower employees to be more strategically successful, or how do we help employees at a human level be successful? Or should we go for both of those?
Well, I'm reading the question from someone that is watching the webinar. So what I read into it is that, yeah, how do you help just regular employees outside of the community or social media teams to be brand advocates as well, to speak on behalf of the company, maybe just as, regular employees, private citizens.
Okay, got it. Thank you. One of the things, I was working with an insurance company and also a brokerage recently, and a lot of their employees were being instructed to get on social media because it was just going to be part of this bigger initiative that the company was taking, sort of be this leader in social media. And a lot of things just weren't defined. For example, if you are in, I don't know, sales or service or human resources, for example, I mean, you have a job to do, and you're sort of measured against that job today outside of social media. And so the idea then is to figure out how, as just a regular human being, as a regular employee within the organization, if you're asked, or if you're looking at social media to sort of extend what it is you do to reach people where their attention is focused, then what does success look like, right? And I think these are discussions that have to happen function by function, department by department, and then trained against that. I think, to be honest, it's easier to learn how to use social media once you have business acumen than it is to get business acumen if you know social media. And that's sort of a controversial perspective, I'm sure. But look, you have to know your business, and you have to be able to then be trained against social media and the networks and the culture and the rules of engagement based on what it is that you're trying to do in a way that makes sense within social media. So to be honest with you, the easier answer is, depending on the role and the function, start one by one. How do they measure success today? How could success be measured in social media? Help them define the scenarios of what engagement would look like, because there's always a variety of scenarios. How to first learn and listen before they engage, and then how to engage, and then how to follow up. Because look, at the end of the day, social media is just a technology platform to bring people together, right? So hopefully social skills and business acumen together will work, but it has to take definition, and it also has to take training. And this is, I think, the big role for anybody who works in social media today. I mean, their role is bigger than just the marketing department. Their role is actually answering this question. It's helping employees get armed and ready to be successful in social media, but to be successful requires definition, and you have to help them define that in a variety of different ways and scenarios.
Well, I have a great follow-up question to that, Brian. What if you think that those who make the rules or policies are not really that familiar with the medium, aka social?
Yeah, that's a problem in of itself. I've met with many legal departments that set up rules for social media that just are completely just out of touch with the way that social media works. It's almost like this old school command and control mentality of just bringing that audience mentality to a much more democratized platform. This is where I talk about the art of politics in business, because a lot of times it's not so much about the value of the medium as it is to how we sort of communicate the value of the medium to people. And that takes sort of a skillful and also artful presentation, understanding of, say, the role of the people who are defining these policies and guidelines, why they're in the organization, how they're valued in the organization, and just sort of help them understand what the real opportunity is. And that's sort of where storytelling comes in. One of the biggest aspects of storytelling is knowing your audience, right? And then being able to talk to them so that as you're talking to them, they start to say like, oh, that's exactly what I was wondering, or that's exactly what I was thinking. Thank you for showing the world to me in that light. So it's a change in perspective, and I believe that one of the reasons why here we are in 2013 and still sort of struggling with a lot of these same questions is because we haven't really taken it upon ourselves to do the hard work of really changing sort of the perception of what this is and how it fits into the greater society of things. Because what we're really talking about is, do those policies match the culture of a digital society? And the answer is often no. So in order to communicate life within a digital society to people who don't live life that way really takes a much more empathetic format of storytelling and examples. And it's almost like this fusion between politics and being a lawyer, where essentially you have to gather the evidence to make a compelling case. And so that's the way that I've always found success in helping people see things differently in order to get the policies appended that are going to be reasonable for the organization and for the people we're trying to engage.
Okay, now we have a question about an all-up brand versus down at the product level. So the question is, a common theme today has been a consolidated voice for brand advocates, but what happens when the products within a company are very different? As a smaller business unit within a large company, we're struggling with how to stand out when social media could make a huge impact just from scale alone. We have the experts and brand advocates internally for our business unit, but we're afraid they're going to be drowned out or ignored by the corporate social voice.
Well, first I got to commend everyone in terms of how they're proposing the questions. Are very well written and articulated. This is a common question that doesn't see common answers to it. The point is that if you have experts that represent a brand or a product or even a sliver of a product, so for example, in your Microsoft example, it could be the Microsoft brand voice, and then it could be the Microsoft Office brand voice, and then within Microsoft Office, you could have sort of an advocate or champion for Office. You could have someone who's a service professional to help people better use Office. You could have someone trying to sell Office. And so you have these different roles and responsibilities under a brand umbrella that's under a brand umbrella, et cetera, et cetera. I would worry less about drowning people out and more about how to empower them to be successful within the ecosystems of their brand environment. So, for example, if someone is an ambassador or an evangelist for a product, then engaging people who are asking questions or who are influential or who are sharing information or who are hosting communities sort of allows for that individual to find success within the communities that are sort of looking for that role or missing that role. And that's true for each of your ambassadors, whatever they represent. So just creating content from a corporate Twitter account or from a branded Twitter account or from a product branded Twitter account, you have to remember that customers follow a brand for a certain reason, but customers also follow aspects of the brand because it helps them accomplish certain things. It gives them direction. It makes them feel part of a bigger community that's more aligned with where they are in life or in work. So I often will hear that we don't want to empower the workforce because we don't want to take away from our main page. And then you start to ask questions about, well, why don't you want to take away from the main page? Well, because that's where we have all of our likes. We don't want to have to rebuild an entire community. It's too much work to host all of these communities. And you start to realize that the discussion is going down a spiral that shows you that we're actually not using social media in the right way or with the right intentions. The point is that a brand can host a community because there's supposed to be this aspect of an exchange, of a promise. That's why we're connecting with one another within these social networks. But if I use one of your products over another product, I am by default saying that I want to be part of this product community. So therefore, you have to create a product community, and I will engage with you in the context of that product and that community. Are you taking away from your brand? No. Are you reinforcing your brand? Absolutely, but you're enforcing it at the product level. So when you think about building communities around the types of relationships that people have with your business, then it starts to make all of the sense in the world. And while it might seem distributed, the reality is your business is distributed, and what you're trying to do is centralize it through social media. And that is the same thing as trying to market to the masses, and that's not what social media is about. It's about one-to-one and one-to-one-to-many. So the answer is yes, you have to empower people within their specific areas of expertise so that the context of that engagement is strengthened for the product. And to me, this is true employee advocacy so that they're empowered to be successful within their domain. But yeah, it takes work, and no, it doesn't compete with the greater corporate efforts.
Great. Well, it looks like we're running out of time. So I'd like to thank all of you for joining us, and we hope that you enjoyed the information presented today, and want to say a big thank you to our presenter, Brian Solis, for a super informative webcast. I know it has the wheels in my head turning. So hopefully it was helpful to all of you as well. And just want to let you know that we'll be sending out a link to the recording of this webinar and the slides, so you'll be able to download them for viewing after this webcast. So thanks again, and have a good rest of the day.